They said it kindly enough. Just water the plants, Mom. Double lock the back door. Samantha smiled, touching my arm like I was a helpful neighbor, not her husband's mother. Greg nodded, distracted, already half focused on their itinerary. We'll send photos from the island, he said. I smiled back, nodded, like I always do. Said nothing. They drove off in that shiny black van, the kids laughing in the back seat about gelato and Greek beaches. The tires kicked up little specks of gravel, and then the street was quiet again. Just me and the hummingbird feeders swaying in the wind. I stood on the porch a moment longer than needed, watched the street as if it might offer a reason or an apology. But it just stood there, ordinary and sun-washed, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us. Inside, I made tea. That's what you do at 72 when your chest feels tight and your hands can't find stillness. You make tea. You sit. You listen to the silence that used to be filled with laughter and running feet. Silence that now echoes like an empty church hall after everyone's gone home. I told myself I was overthinking it. Of course, I was too old for long flights. Of course, they were just being considerate. Of course. Until the next morning, I opened the mailbox and found it an envelope from the travel agency, addressed to Greg, postmarked 3 days ago. I opened it, more out of habit than curiosity. 4 plane tickets. Asheville to Athens. Departure in 3 days. 2 adults. 2 children. Seats together. No Margaret Ellis. I sat down right there at the kitchen table. The tickets spread out like playing cards in a game I didn't know I was losing. I stared at them for a long time. They felt like something sharp wrapped in paper. I made tea again, but this time my hands shook too much to pour properly. Drops splashed onto the counter. I reached for my old address book, the one with dog-eared pages and ink smudges from years of birthdays and doctor appointments. I found the number for the agency. Hi, I'd like to cancel some tickets, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Can I ask why, ma'am? No, I said. Just cancel them. How's it go? The confirmation number was written on a grocery list I'd never finished. I placed it beside the kettle and sat in the living room. The mantel still held a photo of Robert, my Robert, smiling in his Navy uniform, frozen forever at 33. He'd passed 2 decades ago, but I could still hear his voice in moments like this. He wouldn't have let them leave me behind. I'd been a lot of things in this house. A wife, a nurse, a mother, a finder of lost socks and broken dreams. But lately, I'd been just Grandma. A quiet, helpful presence in the background. Not Helen, not Margaret, just Grandma. They assumed I'd wait for updates, photos, videos of sunsets and feta salads. They thought I'd sit still. They were wrong. I opened the drawer where I kept my passport. Still valid. I checked my savings account, 12,000, give or take. A few old savings bonds. No debt, no obligations. No one depending on me. Not anymore. I booked a flight. 1 seat. Aisle. Athens. Then I called Carol from next door. Would you mind watering the plants for a few days? Sure, Honor. Going somewhere? Just a little trip. I packed a small suitcase. Comfy shoes. My navy dress, the one I hadn't worn since Robert's funeral, not because it was sad, but because it made me feel sharp, and I'd forgotten how to feel that way. I threw in my scarf, my paperback copy of To the Lighthouse, and a tube of lipstick that hadn't seen daylight in years. That night, I sat on the porch again. The street was quiet. I thought about what they'd say when they realized. Maybe they'd call, maybe they wouldn't. I didn't care. For once, I wasn't staying behind. If you're still watching, comment once so I know you're still with me. I hadn't been to an airport in over 30 years, not since Greg was in college and we flew to see him in Oregon. Robert held my hand the whole flight because I'd clenched the armrest so tightly my knuckles turned white. He joked, I gripped it like the plane would fall apart if I let go. I didn't laugh then. I wasn't laughing now either, but not from fear. This time, it felt different. Not excitement, not exactly, but something close to resolve. Like something inside me had been asleep for a long time and was just starting to stretch. The cab dropped me off at Asheville Regional just after sunrise. I wore my navy dress under a soft cardigan, suitcase wheels clattering across the sidewalk. The sky was blushing pink, and the air smelled like new grass and distant coffee. I walked slower than I used to, but I walked like I meant it. The gate agent gave me the kind of smile young people reserve for old ladies traveling alone, half polite, half pity. I didn't mind. I wasn't here to impress anyone. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." I nodded, clutching my boarding pass like a shield. The airport was loud, bright, all glass and polished tile. Families argued. Children cried. Announcements echoed through the air like someone shouting down a well. But I kept walking, following signs, reading the screens with a surprising steadiness. I didn't feel old. I felt invisible in the best possible way. No one asked where I was going. No one asked why I was alone. And that, somehow, felt like freedom. On the plane, I took my aisle seat, fastened the belt, and exhaled. The woman next to me was maybe in her 30s. Wedding ring, earbuds, exhausted. She didn't say a word. I didn't either. I didn't need to fill the silence. The older I got, the more I found comfort in not having to explain myself. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I dozed off. Not the deep sleep of youth, but the kind of sleep your body demands after too many years of waiting for permission. I woke up when we were descending. The sky outside the window had changed Mediterranean blue, broad and still. For a moment, I forgot who I was supposed to be. I wasn't Grandma Margaret. I wasn't anyone's emergency contact. I was just there. A woman on a plane to Greece. A woman who chose this. A woman who left. At the Athens airport, customs was easier than I expected. The agent barely glanced at my passport. A few stamps, a nod, and I was through. I took a taxi to a small pension on a side street, with ivy-covered balconies and flower pots on every ledge. The woman at the front desk spoke excellent English. She called me Madam Ellis, and something in me straightened. I liked that. The room was simple. White tile floors, a narrow bed, a small desk near the window. I placed my suitcase against the wall and sat at the edge of the bed, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't cry. Grief doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it just sits beside you, quiet and firm, like an old dog who doesn't bark anymore but still watches the door. That evening I walked a few blocks, found a tiny cafe that smelled of bread and lemons. I ordered olives and soft cheese. The waiter smiled when I asked if I could sit outside. He didn't hurry me, didn't ask if I needed help with the menu. I sat for nearly an hour, watching people pass. I didn't check my phone once. Nobody was waiting on an update from me anyway. The next morning, the light slipped in through the shutters, softer than home. I stood barefoot on the cool floor and felt something loosen in my chest. Not joy, not yet, but space. I put on lipstick. Just a little. The same soft mauve I used to wear before beige took over my life. Beige walls, beige clothes, beige moods. The woman at the front desk handed me a folded note. "A quiet place," she said. "Anaphiotica. It's old. Peaceful." It was. Whitewashed walls, winding alleys, sleepy cats draped over warm stone. I wandered until my feet ached. Then I found a bench shaded by a fig tree and sat. And there, I met her. "I wouldn't sit there too long," a voice said beside me. "You'll stiffen up, and it'll take 3 men and a priest to get you standing again." Oh, I turned, startled, and found a woman about my age standing a few feet away. Tall, silver hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, thick glasses hanging from a cord around her neck. "Then I'll take my chances," I replied, unable to hide the smile tugging at my lips. She shrugged. "Your knees? Your funeral?" She sat beside me anyway, pulled out a bottle of water from her bag, took a swig, and sighed. "Tourist?" I hesitated. "Not exactly." "Escaping something?" I looked at her again. Something sharp in her tone, but not unkind. "You could say that." "Me too." She stuck out a hand. "Joan. Joan Beckett. Widow. Former high school principal. Sharp tongue, mild heart. And you?" "Margaret Ellis. Widow. Former nurse. Quiet tongue. Heart. Still figuring it out." She laughed. Not politely, genuinely. And it surprised me how much I liked that sound. We walked together the rest of the morning. She pointed out things I wouldn't have noticed, like a broken shutter painted lavender, or a cat curled around a busted flower pot like it had claimed the whole city. She wasn't rushing anywhere, and neither was I. That evening, we had dinner under a canopy of vines and fairy lights. She drank wine. I ordered sparkling water. So, she asked, tilting her glass toward me, what did they do? The ones you left behind? He blinked. They went to Greece without me, I said. She frowned. Seriously? They told me I was too old for long flights, that it would be more comfortable if I stayed home and watched the house. Joan leaned back. What they meant was, they didn't want to deal with you needing things. Slower pace, maybe a cane, maybe questions they couldn't answer quickly. I didn't respond. You're here now, she said simply. So they were wrong. We sat in silence after that, but not the uncomfortable kind. I liked her. I didn't trust her yet, but I liked her. That night, I lay in bed and watched the ceiling fan turn slow, lazy circles above me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter, but I was awake. For the first time in years. Joan didn't strike me as the spontaneous type, but 2 days after we met, she knocked on my door with a train schedule in one hand and a croissant in the other. Florence, she said. You in? I blinked at her. That's in Italy. Very good, she said, nodding like a teacher. Also, the trains are half price for seniors, and I hear they don't card. I opened the door wider. We booked 2 one-way tickets that afternoon at a corner internet cafe. The man at the desk kept trying to sell us a sightseeing package with a skip-the-line tour and a gelato-making class. Joan waved him off like a fly. We're not here for Instagram, she muttered. We're here for the art. That evening, we ate dinner under an awning that rattled in the breeze. I'd forgotten how good food could taste when you weren't worried about someone else's schedule. We didn't talk much. Joan wasn't one for small talk, and I wasn't one for sharing without prompting. But when we got up to leave, she handed me the croissant wrapper. For the journal you're pretending not to keep, she said. We left Athens the next morning just after 9 a.m. The train hummed and rocked as it left the city, slipping past olive groves and dusty hills. Joan read a French mystery novel, occasionally letting out a dry little laugh that made other passengers look over. I just stared out the window, letting the scenery press itself into memory. I never thought I'd be doing this at 72, I said quietly. Joan didn't look up. That's the thing about doing something new. Age has very little to do with it, and courage has got nothing to prove. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I understood yet. Florence greeted us with the scent of rain on stone and the chaos of a small station trying to act like a large one. Our hotel was tucked between a bakery and a shoe store. No elevators, just narrow stairs and faded carpet that clung to the soles of your shoes. The room was modest. 1 window, 2 twin beds, a wardrobe that smelled faintly of lavender. Joan claimed the bed nearest the door. I like to be the first out in case of fire, she said. That night, we ate pasta in a small trattoria where the waiter looked like he'd been born tired. The walls were covered in photos of people who probably thought they were famous. We didn't drink wine. Instead, we talked. She told me about her late husband, Harold. Smart as a whip, socially dense as a plank. She smiled like it was a compliment. He used to write me notes on graph paper. I told her about Robert, about his laugh, his hands, how he always cut the toast diagonally, even if I didn't ask. She nodded slowly, like she knew what I meant without needing every detail. The next day, we visited the Uffizi. The lines were long. Joan grumbled. Why doesn't art come with appointments? She muttered, then winked at me. But maybe the wait builds character. Inside, it was like walking through a museum of breathlessness. Every room opened onto another painting I'd only ever seen in textbooks. Botticelli, Da Vinci, Caravaggio. Names I'd once whispered when helping Lily with art homework, never imagining I'd see them up close. When we stood in front of the Birth of Venus, I didn't cry, but I felt something settle low in my throat recognition, maybe. Like beauty didn't have to be loud to move you. Like silence had its own language if you stayed still enough to listen. Joan didn't say anything. She just stood beside me, quiet, arms crossed, nodding slowly like she approved of something. We walked for hours that day, through narrow alleys and sun-washed courtyards. At one point, Joan stopped in front of a shop window and said, "I think I'll buy something ridiculous today." I laughed. "Like what?" "I don't know, something red and impractical." She didn't buy anything red. She bought a pair of sunglasses shaped like flowers and a scarf with orange tassels. "Close enough," she said. That night we sat on the balcony of our hotel with cups of weak tea and a box of almond cookies. The air was soft, and the city glowed like an oil painting left under candlelight. Joan asked about my family. I paused. "They're fine. That's not what I asked. They're busy, grown, comfortable. Do they know you're here?" "Not exactly." She nodded. "Let them wonder." It was the kind of thing I never would have said to myself. The kind of thing I didn't know I needed to hear. Back inside, I picked up the journal I hadn't told Joan I brought. A small leather-bound book Robert once gave me for our 30th anniversary. I used to write grocery lists in it. That night, I wrote something else. I am here. Not because I was invited. Not because I was expected. But because I chose to come. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a street sweeper below. Joan was already dressed, scrolling through headlines on her tablet. "You missed a whole political meltdown in Britain," she said, "but gained an extra croissant in the breakfast basket. I call that a win." We spent the day in gardens, walking slowly, sitting often. Joan told stories about students she once taught how the worst behaved ones always ended up being the most interesting adults. I told her about Lily, how she once called me the egg whisperer, how she used to draw little animals with disproportionate eyes and tape them to my fridge, how she still texted me, even when her parents were too busy. "Does she know where you are?" Joan asked. "Number." "Will you tell her?" "Eventually." That evening I bought a postcard, the kind with the Duomo at sunset. I didn't write to Greg or Samantha. I wrote to Lily. "Dear Lily, guess where I am? Florence. The buildings are older than your grandfather's jokes and just as charming. There's music in every street, and the kind of silence in churches that feels alive. I hope you're still drawing. I'm thinking of you. Love, Grandma." I dropped it in the post the next morning. Later that day, we stood on the Ponte Vecchio, watching the light dance off the river. Joan leaned over the railing. "I haven't traveled like this in years," she said. "Me neither." "What changed?" I looked at her. "I got tired of waiting to be asked." She grinned. And I finally realized no one was going to. She didn't respond right away. Then she said, "You sit taller now. Less folded." I smiled. "So do you." End quote. We stayed another day in Florence. No museums, no schedules. Just wandering, gelato, and a small alleyway with a violinist playing something slow and aching. That night, I checked my phone. 7 missed calls. 4 from Samantha. 3 from Greg. A voicemail. "Mom, where are you? Please call us. We're worried. The kids are confused. We got to the airport and just call us, please." I didn't listen to the others. I turned the phone off. And I slept like I hadn't in years. Lisbon smelled like salt and something sweet baking nearby. We arrived just after sunset, stepping out of the train into warm air that felt like someone's hand gently touching your shoulder. The buildings around the square were chipped and cheerful, blue tiles catching the last of the golden light. Our guest house had pale shutters and iron balconies draped with drying laundry. Inside, the floors creaked, and the walls held stories in quiet ways, old photographs, faded rugs, a bowl of lemons on the counter that looked like it had always belonged there. "I like this place," Joan said, kicking off her shoes. "It feels like it doesn't care who's coming or going." I nodded, setting my suitcase down beside the bed. I didn't know what to say yet. My thoughts were still in Florence, or maybe still somewhere in myself I hadn't named. That night, we sat on the balcony. Children played in the street below, their laughter bouncing against the tile walls like song. I watched them, remembering Lily at that age, how she once tried to name every star from our backyard, insisting they listened if you spoke kindly. In the morning, Joan wasn't well. She brushed it off at first, just a little tired, she said, maybe something she ate. But I could see it in her eyes. that old dimness women learn to hide. "You go explore," she said from bed, waving her hand. "I'll nap. I'll be fine." But I didn't. Instead, I made tea in the tiny guest house kitchen, brought it to her with toast and a sliced pear, then pulled a chair beside her and opened a book we'd picked up in Florence. She drifted off while I read aloud, voice low, the light from the window casting soft lines across her cheek. It reminded me of Robert's last weeks, of bringing him water, of brushing crumbs from his collar, of sitting in silence because the words no longer mattered. But this was different. This wasn't caretaking as duty. It was presence as choice. That afternoon, I walked to the corner market for eggs, tomatoes, a bit of soft cheese. The woman at the stall smiled when I fumbled my coins, bagged everything gently like she knew I was out of practice. I cooked a simple meal in the guest house's tiny kitchen, and Joan joined me on the balcony, bundled in a shawl. "Why didn't you go out?" she asked, voice a bit scratchy. "I wanted to stay." Ugh. She looked at me, really looked, then nodded. "Thank you." We ate slowly. No conversation, no commentary. Just two women, two plates, and a breeze that carried the scent of grilled sardines from somewhere nearby. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I stood alone at the window and listened to the city hum, not loud, not showy, just alive. I thought about all the times I'd cared for others because I had to. The hundreds of little invisible kindnesses no one ever called by name. This time, I called it something else. Love. We left Lisbon just after dawn. Joan said the sea air had done wonders for her joints, but I suspected what she really liked was the way the wind tangled her hair and made her feel wild. The train ride to Seville was long. Flat plains stretched endlessly outside our window, slowly changing from olive groves to dusty, sunlit scrubland. I didn't mind the silence. I was learning to savor it. Joan slept for most of the journey, arms crossed like a schoolteacher on a break. I kept my notebook in my lap but didn't write. I just watched the land roll by and tried not to think about my phone buried deep in my bag, turned off for 3 days now. But once we arrived in Seville, the quiet inside me stirred. The city felt alive in a way that wasn't polite. It pulsed. The air shimmered. The alleys sang with late-night voices and clinking glasses. It didn't wait for your permission to be beautiful. It simply was. Our guest house sat above a small ceramic shop that smelled of dust and citrus polish. From the balcony, we could see orange trees shedding petals into the street below. "This place," Joan said, spinning slowly in the room like a girl testing a new dress, "demands earrings." She pulled out a pair of silver hoops and put them on without hesitation. I didn't have any jewelry except a strand of Robert's old pearls, but I pinned my hair back and smoothed my dress. That felt like enough. That night, we followed the sound of clapping. Down an alley, through a narrow arch, we found a small courtyard restaurant where a woman danced flamenco not for tourists, not for tips, but like she was fighting time itself. She was older than either of us, her face lined, her arms strong, but when she danced, age wasn't something she carried, it was something she had claimed. I couldn't look away. Back at the guest house, I finally turned on my phone. 16 missed calls. Voicemails from Greg, from Samantha. No new messages for days now, just silence. Until I saw Lily's name. It was a voice memo. "Grandma, I don't know if you'll hear this, but I miss you. I saw a photo of you in Lisbon, I think. You looked free. I don't think Mom and Dad get it, but I do. Just call me, even if it's just for a minute." I listened to it twice. Then again, her voice cracked on the word free, and that small break broke something open in me. I didn't call yet, but I kept the phone on. The next morning, I bought a scarf from a woman at a stall near the cathedral. Bright yellow, like marigolds in July. Not a color I usually wore, but it caught the light like it belonged in my life. Joan bargained for olives. I watched her from a shaded bench, the scarf folded in my lap, Lily's message still echoing in my chest. That afternoon, I sat by the window and wrote in my notebook. It's not that I was never needed. I was always needed, but never seen, never chosen, never invited. I looked out at the street below. A boy kicked a ball against a wall. A woman walked past with a basket of laundry. and a red flower in her hair. Life, in all its messy music, moved on. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I'd been left behind. I felt like I'd stepped out finally into the sun. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. It came tucked under the door, folded into thirds. No envelope. My name written in Greg's handwriting rushed, sharp, like he hadn't decided if he should send it until the last second. I didn't open it right away. Joan saw it, of course. She was reading by the window, one leg curled beneath her, glasses slipping down her nose. "From the prodigal son?" she asked, not looking up. I smiled barely. "Something like that." I placed the note on the nightstand. Let it sit there like steam rising from a cup I didn't want to sip just yet. Instead, we went walking. The sun had settled low over Seville's rooftops, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The scent of oranges hung heavy in the air. Joan spoke about architecture and laundry lines, and some odd little parrot she swore was stalking her from rooftop to rooftop. I listened. I laughed. But the note sat like a pebble in my shoe. That evening, when the sky turned pink like faded lipstick, I unfolded it. It wasn't long. "Mom, we don't understand what this is. The kids are confused. We thought you were just upset, but now you're gone. You canceled the trip. You disappeared. If this is about being excluded, it wasn't intentional. Please, come home. Let's talk." "Greg, no. I'm sorry." "No. I see you. Just confusion, wrapped in control." I folded the letter back along its creases and slid it into the drawer beside my bed. When I looked up, Joan was watching me, not nosy, not prying, just present. "Well?" I shrugged. He misses the version of me that stayed quiet. Joan leaned back, hands behind her head. "Men often confuse silence with agreement, especially when we've been giving them peace and calling it love." I laughed a short, surprised sound. "I'm not angry," I said, more to myself than to her. "I didn't say you were." "No. But I think they expected me to be. Expected me to scream, to demand something. And instead you left. I just stopped asking to be seen." Joan nodded. "You said it." I didn't cry, but something in my chest unknotted. That night, I wrote Lily a short message. "Sweetheart, I'm okay. Still moving. Still thinking. Still me. I'll call soon. Thank you for your voice. It found me when I needed it most." She replied with a single word. "Always." End quote. I didn't reply. Some truths don't need a second sentence. Granada felt like stone and silence. After the fire and rhythm of Seville, it was almost startling the way the city slowed down, like it had nothing to prove. Narrow streets whispered under our feet, and the air carried the scent of pomegranates and dust. The inn we stayed at was quiet, run by a man with tired eyes and a kind voice. Our room overlooked a courtyard full of laundry lines and faded shutters. Nothing polished, nothing curated, just honest living. "This place," Joan said, laying her scarf across the back of a chair, "feels like it keeps secrets." I didn't answer. I was still thinking about the letter, about Greg, about how it had said so much and still nothing at all. That evening, Joan napped. I wandered through the city alone, following no map, just the pull of instinct. I passed a small shop with linen skirts, silver earrings, a postcard stand full of blue skies and slow shadows. I bought nothing. I just touched things. Let my hands remember texture, purpose, choice. And then, on a bench overlooking the rooftops, I listened again to Lily's voice message. Soft, hesitant, unafraid of truth. This time, I called her back. She picked up on the second ring. "Grandma?" Her voice caught. "I'm here, sweetheart." There was silence on the line. Then I heard a door close, footsteps across tile. I thought I don't know, maybe you weren't coming back. "I don't know if I am," I said gently. "Not the way they expect." I could almost hear her nodding. We talked for 15 minutes. About school. About a boy she liked but didn't trust. About a drawing she'd made of me on the balcony and Lisbon's scarf around my neck, looking out like I belonged in the painting. "You looked awake," she said. "Like yourself." "I felt like myself," I said. Before we hung up, she asked, "Can I see you when you do come back?" "Of course," I said, "but only if you promise to keep drawing." M? I never stopped. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, the window cracked open to the cool air. The moon spilled light across the floor like milk. Joan stirred once, then sighed and settled deeper into sleep. I wrote in my notebook, "Some connections need silence before they're ready to hold sound. Some doors open with a whisper, not a bang." I turned off the lamp, folded my scarf on the nightstand, and whispered into the dark, "Thank you." Oh, I wasn't sure if I meant Lily or life itself. Maybe both. The next morning in Granada was colder than the day before. The kind of air that pressed close to the skin, not unpleasant, but alert. Joan was already dressed, sipping tea by the window, a local newspaper folded in her lap. "Sleep?" she asked without looking up. "Deep," I said. "The kind that feels like floating." She nodded. "I think this city likes you." I didn't respond. I was watching the light shift on the floor, slow and deliberate, like it had somewhere to be but didn't mind the wait. I reached for my phone, more out of habit than hope. One new message. Not from Lily. From Greg. Just one line. "Mom, did we lose you?" No accusations. No panic. No list of what I'd missed or what I should explain. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to read between the words or let them be what they were. A quiet recognition. Joan glanced over. "He wrote?" I nodded. "Only one sentence." "That's progress, is it?" Most men take a whole paragraph to say nothing. One good sentence is a miracle. I smiled despite myself. But I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I pulled my notebook from the nightstand and opened to a clean page. Things I've never said out loud. I wasn't always tired. I just got tired of not being seen. Every time you called me old-fashioned, I swallowed a sentence I should have said. You used to give me rocks from the backyard and call them treasure. That was the last time you gave me something without expecting anything in return. I paused. The page looked more like a bruise than a list, but it didn't hurt to write it. Not anymore. That afternoon we climbed toward the Alhambra, slowly, with aching knees and borrowed resolve. Joan grumbled the whole way. "This better be worth the hill," she muttered. I didn't survive a 34-year school board for nothing. But when we reached the top, both of us fell silent. Arches, gardens, carved walls that whispered across centuries. I sat on a bench, framed by shadow and sunlight, the sound of a fountain nearby. Joan took a photo without asking, without posing. Later, as we walked back down, she said quietly, "You look different now, not newer, just settled." I nodded. I feel like I stopped holding my breath. That night, back in the room, I stared again at Greg's message. I didn't answer, but I didn't delete it either. Because maybe, just maybe, he meant it as a line, not a hook. And that was something. Cadiz felt like breath after a long climb. Flat, wide streets. Salt in the air. Wind that didn't ask permission to tangle your hair. Joan said the sea helped her stand straighter. I think it helped her remember she wasn't made for stillness. Neither was I. We found a guest house near the old port, small wooden shutters, rooms that smelled faintly of citrus and old linen. From the balcony, we watched fishing boats come in at dusk, nets dragging behind them like stories that didn't want to be told. That night, we walked the beach barefoot. Joan found a piece of sea glass and tucked it into her pocket without a word. I wandered closer to the tide, let the cold water nip at my ankles. The waves weren't dramatic, just persistent. Like they'd been working at the same rhythm for centuries, without applause. Further down the shore, an older couple held hands, walking like teenagers with nowhere urgent to be. No performance, just presence. I sat on a low rock and watched the sun dissolve into the horizon. Joan stood behind me for a while, humming the same tune she'd hummed on the train from Granada. It floated in and out of the wind like it didn't want to be caught. Back at the room, I finally opened my voice memo app. I stared at the red button for a long time. Then I pressed it. "Greg," I said, and my voice sounded steady, older than I remembered, but clear. "I'm not angry, but I am changed." I paused. Let the quiet settle before continuing. I spent a lot of years waiting to be invited, to be needed, to be seen. And I was, sometimes, but mostly, I was background. Another pause. I don't say this to hurt you. I say it because it's true. I love you. I always will. But I'm not coming back to the role I played. The words hovered there, honest and unpolished. If you want me in your life, it has to be as a person. A whole one. Not as a backup plan. Not as a name on an emergency contact list. I took a breath. I hope you understand. Then I tapped send. The sea kept whispering outside. It didn't reply, but maybe it didn't need to. The reply came the next morning. Not from Greg. From Lily. A voice memo just like before. I waited until Joan went out for her morning coffee. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped my scarf around my shoulders like armor, and pressed play. Hi, Grandma, she began, her voice soft but steady. I don't know if I'm supposed to hear this, but I did, and I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing the little inhale she always did before saying something that mattered. I've spent a lot of time wondering what kind of woman I want to become, and I think you just showed me. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. I played the message twice. Then I opened my notebook and wrote at the top of a fresh page. She sees me. It felt so small, so huge. That afternoon, I sat with Joan on the rooftop terrace. The sun made everything feel golden, the tiles, the lemon tree in the corner, even our tired hands holding mismatched mugs of tea. Anything good? Joan asked. I nodded. Lily. She raised her cup in a little toast. That one's got light in her. I smiled. She told me she's proud of me. Joan blinked. You know, I'm not sure I've ever heard those words from my own daughter. Me neither, I said. Not from mine, but from Lily it felt like it came from all the women who never got to say it before. Joan leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes. Maybe we say it for them then. We sat like that for a long while, two women in their 60s, shoulders kissed by sun, hearts lighter than the mugs in our hands. Later, I walked alone down the boardwalk by the harbor. The fishermen were hauling in nets. Children chased pigeons. A man played violin near the benches, something slow, something aching. And I realized something. I didn't miss my old life. Not the clutter, not the schedules, not even the kitchen where I'd folded 1,000 holiday napkins. I missed people, but not the versions of them who only saw me when I was useful. And I loved them, I did. But I also loved myself now. That night, I sent Lily a photo. The sunset from our terrace, with 2 mugs on the table. I added a caption, "For the girl who reminds me who I really am." She replied with a heart. No words, just enough. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The little stationery shop in Cadiz sat between a barber and a bakery. It wasn't on any tourist map. There were no signs in English, just a small bell that jingled when I opened the door, and the smell of paper and old ink. A woman behind the counter nodded politely. She was older, with silver hair in a braid and deep laugh lines around her eyes. She didn't ask if I needed help. She just let me wander. And there it was tucked on a high shelf near the back. A leather-bound notebook. Soft brown, no logo, no lines. Just blank pages waiting without pressure. I bought it without hesitation. Back at the guest house, I ran my hand across the cover. It was warm in the afternoon light, like it had been waiting on that shelf just for me. I opened to the first page and didn't write, "Dear Greg." I didn't write, "Dear Lily," or "Dear anyone." I just wrote, "This is for me." The pen felt heavy and sure in my hand, like it had something to say too. I didn't write about the trip, not yet. I didn't list the cities, the meals, the awkward silences. I didn't even write about Joan humming while she brushed her teeth. I wrote about the first time I remembered disappearing. It was a PTA meeting in 1989. Greg was in 3rd grade. I had brought cookies, the store-bought kind, because I'd been working late. One of the other mothers, a perfect woman with hand-labeled folders, said in front of everyone, "Oh, Margaret, you always take the shortcut, don't you?" I laughed. Everyone laughed. And I never brought cookies again. That story had lived in me for decades. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't trauma, it was just a tiny erasure, the first of many. I kept writing. About the times I cleaned up the mess and no one noticed. The birthdays I planned, the sicknesses I nursed, the sacrifices I didn't name out loud, because mothers weren't supposed to name them. I wrote for an hour, maybe more. Time slipped sideways. When Joan came back from her walk, I didn't hide the notebook. She glanced at it and said, "Good. You're finally telling the real story." That night, we sat by the sea again. There was no violinist, no poetry in the air. Just us. Just wind and waves and the quiet that comes when you've stopped explaining yourself. "I don't think I need to go home," I said. Joan nodded. "I don't think you have to." "I think I need to finish this," I said, holding up the notebook. "Whatever this is." Joan clinked her water glass against mine. "To the story," she said. "Especially the parts no one else bothered to ask about. How?" And under the stars, with sand between our toes and salt in our hair, I whispered to the sea, to the silence, to myself, "I'm still here." The stationery shop was quiet, almost hidden squeezed between a shuttered bakery and a barber shop that hadn't changed its window decal in 30 years. It didn't announce itself. No glossy postcards, no souvenir magnets, just a faded awning and a brass bell above the door that jingled like it remembered another decade. Joan stayed outside on a bench, squinting into the sunlight. I stepped in alone. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old paper. The kind of smell I hadn't breathed in years, maybe not since Greg was in high school and I still kept a written calendar on the wall. Every shelf felt slow, deliberate. Nothing digital. Nothing fast. I ran my fingers along a row of journals, cloth-bound, spiral-bound, some with floral prints, others with gold foil phrases like dream big or live, laugh, love. But tucked behind them, almost hidden, was one that didn't try to sell itself. Leather-bound, soft brown, no lines, no quote, just blank pages and quiet promise. I bought it without thinking twice. That afternoon, back in our guest house, I sat by the window. The sea air drifted in, warm and salty. I held the notebook in my lap for a long time before I opened it. And when I did, I didn't write, "Dear Greg." I didn't write to Lily or Samantha or even Joan. I wrote, "This is not for them. This is for me." The words sat alone on the page, slightly slanted. Honest. I stared at them for a moment, then smiled. It felt like a small rebellion, or maybe a soft return. I turned the page and began again. Not a diary. Not a complaint. Just truth. The first time I disappeared wasn't when they left me behind on that trip. It was long before that. I wrote about the PTA meeting in 1989. Greg was 8. I'd brought cookies store-bought because I was working full-time and barely had time to sleep, let alone bake. Another mom, all aprons and perfect lipstick, had said, "Oh, Margaret, you always take the shortcut, don't you?" I had laughed. Everyone had laughed, and I never brought cookies again. I hadn't thought about that moment in decades, but now it came back, sharp and clear. That was the beginning, I wrote. Not of being invisible, but of letting it happen. I kept writing. About birthdays where I took the pictures but was never in them. About meals I cooked while everyone watched football. About the silence I filled so others could speak. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it didn't surprise me anymore. When Joan came back from her walk, she saw me writing and didn't interrupt. Just poured 2 glasses of water and handed me one. "Finally, giving yourself the pen?" she asked. I nodded. Not to explain, just to remember. Oh. That night, we sat on the beach again, watching the stars blink awake above the Atlantic. "I don't think I'm going home," I said quietly. Joan didn't answer right away. Then, "I don't think the version of you that left has to." I looked down at the sand between my toes, damp and cool. "I'm not running," I said. "No," she agreed. "You're arriving." Back in our room, I slid the notebook under my pillow. Not because I was hiding it, but because it finally felt like something worth keeping close. We left Cadiz on a Tuesday. There was no real plan, no final itinerary. Just a shared sense between Joan and me that it was time to move, that something had shifted. "I think I'm ready for mountains," Joan said, squinting at the train schedule like it might speak back. I nodded. Me too, somewhere keyter. We picked Rhonda, a town nestled high above a gorge, whitewashed buildings, cobbled streets, and air that smelled of stone and time. It didn't promise anything, not healing, not distraction, just space. That first night, the wind howled through the hills, and I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling strangely still. I wasn't restless. I wasn't waiting for something to happen. I was listening to myself, to the quiet voice I'd spent years ignoring. On the third morning, I woke before the sun. I made tea in the little kitchenette and stepped out onto the balcony, wrapped in Joan's old shawl. The sky was still dark, the stars fading gently into dawn. I opened my notebook, the leather one, soft from weeks of use now, and stared at the blank page. Then I wrote, slowly, "Maybe I'm not running anymore." And I sat with that thought, let it breathe. Because the truth was, I hadn't thought this far ahead. When I left, all I wanted was out. Space, silence, freedom. I wanted the noise of obligation to stop so I could hear myself again. But now, the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of something new, something steady. I wasn't the woman who'd sat in the living room in Tampa, surrounded by suitcases that weren't hers. I wasn't the woman who tried to earn affection by cooking another holiday meal no one appreciated. I had changed. The question was, now what? Joan noticed the shift in me before I said a word. "You've got the look," she said over breakfast. "Like you're halfway packed, even though your clothes are still in the closet." I smirked. "Is it that obvious?" She shrugged. "You've stopped needing to be here. That's usually the sign." I stirred honey into my tea. "I've been thinking about going home." Joan didn't flinch. She just nodded, slowly. "And what does that mean now?" That stopped me. What did it mean? Home used to be my kitchen, my garden, my porch swing. But those things had become places of invisibility, backgrounds for other people's comfort. "I think it means I want to go back without disappearing again," I said. Joan's eyes twinkled. "There she is." I laughed. "I don't know what I'll say, or if I'll even tell them right away. But I miss Lily. I miss her questions, her way of seeing things. Then go back for her, not for them." Idfuna. That night, I pulled out a clean sheet and began to write not a reply, not an apology, but a declaration. "Dear all, I've been away. Not just in miles, but in ways that matter more. I've remembered pieces of myself I didn't know were lost. I've learned how quiet can heal, how space can teach. I'm not angry, but I am no longer available in the ways I once was. If you want me in your lives, truly let it be a door, not a demand. I will return, but only as the woman I've found, not the one I left behind. Margaret." I folded the letter and slid it into the back of my notebook. Not to send yet, but to carry with me as a map, a reminder. We spent one last afternoon in Rhonda walking along the cliffs. Joan, ever the observer, took photos of shadows, of birds landing on railings, of elderly men sitting alone on benches, watching life pass with soft eyes. I noticed how I walked differently now. Not rushed, not heavy with errands or purpose. I walked like someone who belonged to herself. At one point, we stopped near an overlook, the wind lifting Joan's hair into a silver halo. She turned to me. "You're going to be okay, you know." I nodded. "I think I already am." We stood there a long time, looking out at the gorge below, vast, carved by time, beautiful because of its breaks. I thought of the years I spent patching cracks, holding everyone else together. And now, I understood. It's not weakness to break. It's wisdom to rebuild differently. On our last evening, I bought a postcard. Just one. A photo of the bridge in Rhonda at sunset. I wrote on the back, "For Lily, one day, I'll bring you here." I didn't write a return address. I just mailed it. A gesture. A promise. Not for reconciliation. For connection. The next morning, I packed. Not with dread. With peace. Joan hugged me at the train station, her arms warm and strong. You know where I'll be, she said. I'll write. I promised. She laughed. You better. Don't make me show up on your porch. And with that, she stepped back onto the platform, waving as my train pulled away. I sat by the window and opened my notebook one more time. And on the last page, I wrote, coming home, but not returning, becoming again. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. I didn't tell them I was coming back. No flight itinerary, no heads-up call, no dramatic entrance. Just a quiet Tuesday flight out of Madrid, a window seat, and a bag half full of notebooks. The airport in Tampa smelled like floor wax and air conditioning, just like I remembered. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I booked a room at a modest inn on the edge of town, the kind with floral bedspreads and complimentary breakfast that meant instant oatmeal and bananas going soft. It was perfect. I needed space to think, to look before I leapt, to see the version of home I left, before deciding how I'd belong in it now. The first thing I did the next morning was walk, not drive. Walk. I wanted to feel the sidewalk under my feet, to hear the way the wind moved through the Spanish moss, to test if the air here still knew my name. I passed the bakery where I used to buy Lily cupcakes on Fridays. It was still there. The chalkboard now advertised oat milk lattes and turmeric muffins progress, I suppose. I kept walking until I reached the park. Our park, where I used to push Greg on the swings. And later Lily, where Samantha would read her magazines while the kids played, always with one eye on her phone. And there she was, Lily. Taller than I remembered. Thinner, too. Her hair was longer, darker. She was sitting cross-legged on the grass with a sketch pad and headphones in her ears, drawing something intently. Her face scrunched up in focus, just like her dad's used to when he did puzzles as a boy. I didn't call out. I just watched. From a bench a few yards away, like a stranger. But something must have nudged her. She looked up. Her eyes scanned the park lazily, then paused. Stopped. Locked onto mine. At first, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she stood up, the sketchpad falling to her side, her mouth parting slightly. Grandma? It wasn't loud, just a whisper across the grass. I smiled. She ran to me. No hesitation, no embarrassment, just arms around my neck and that familiar scent of teenage shampoo and sun. You're here, she said into my shoulder. You're really here. I nodded, tears prickling but not falling. I'm here, baby. She pulled back and looked at me like she was trying to memorize my face. Does Dad know? Number. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't read. Do you want him to? I paused, then said, honestly, eventually. But not today. She nodded. Okay. We sat on the bench for a long time, saying nothing. The kind of nothing that said everything. She showed me her sketchpad portraits, mostly. Old people, her bus driver, a neighbor, a woman she saw at the DMV who looked like a queen from another world. You've been watching the world, I said softly. She shrugged. It's what you taught me. That evening, I returned to my little room and wrote, home is not a place you demand entrance to. It's a language. You listen before you speak. Over the next week, I made no grand visits. I walked past the house but didn't go up the drive. The hydrangeas I planted were still blooming. The porch light still hung crooked from that storm 2 years ago. No one had fixed it. One afternoon, I sat at the back of the community church during choir practice. The same pew I used to sit in every Sunday, third from the left. No one recognized me at first, not with the short hair and new posture. But when Miss Harper from the flower committee turned around and gasped, I just smiled and placed a finger to my lips. Not yet, I mouthed. She nodded. Understood. People think the act of disappearing is selfish. But I've come to believe sometimes the most generous thing we can do for others is step away long enough to remember who we are, so we don't keep offering them a shell of someone we used to be. The first time Greg saw me again wasn't planned. It was at the grocery store. I was in the frozen vegetables aisle, deciding between peas or a medley, when I heard the cartwheel squeak behind me. Mom? I turned slowly. He looked older. Not tired, just heavier. Like time had added layers to him I hadn't seen before. "Hi, Greg." He blinked. You're you're here." "I am." He stared at the bag of peas in my hand like it held some answer he couldn't find. "I didn't think—" "I know," I said gently. "That's okay." We stood there, awkward and surrounded by bags of steamable corn. He cleared his throat. "Do you want to come by?" I smiled. "Not today." His shoulders dropped. Not with offense, with relief. "Okay," he said. "But I'd like to. In." "I know," I said again. "We'll get there." He nodded. And just before turning down the next aisle, he said, "You look good." "Thank you." I meant it. I felt good. That night, I returned to my inn, brewed some tea, and pulled out my notebook. On the inside flap, I wrote, "They don't need to understand all the chapters you lived without them, only respect that you lived them." Joan called later. "So?" she asked. "How does it feel?" "Like I'm not pretending anymore," I said. She laughed. "Then you've made it." I thought of the woman I was months ago, seated on a plane, small and unsure. Now I was back, not to reclaim what I lost, but to build what I deserved. Spring came softly. No sudden bloom of tulips. No fanfare. Just the quiet stretching of light in the evenings and a breeze that felt kinder on the skin. Margaret noticed the air first. It no longer clung heavy with memory. It felt like something had shifted, quietly and completely. She woke up each morning with purpose, not urgency. She moved slower, chose her words more carefully. And more than anything, she listened not just to others, but to herself. Lily visited often, sometimes with sketchbooks, sometimes with silence. They didn't speak much of the months Margaret had been gone. They didn't need to. Some healing doesn't come through explanation. Sometimes it comes through shared stillness, through presence. There was no dramatic apology from Samantha. No flowers or long letters. Just a small card that arrived one afternoon in the mailbox. On the front was a photo Margaret herself had taken years ago. Greg, Samantha, and little Lily at the beach, squinting into the sun, all teeth and sand. On the back, in Samantha's tight, careful handwriting, were 5 words. "I hope you're doing well." Margaret stood with it for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She just smiled, a little sadly, and set the card on the mantel next to the candle she now lit every Sunday. Not for grief, but for grace. She wasn't angry anymore. That season had passed like a storm. Loud, messy, but in the end, it didn't destroy the house. It only cleaned the air. Margaret didn't feel triumphant. She felt clear, whole. Not because anyone had fixed the past, but because she had stopped demanding that they did. And that, she thought, was what real forgiveness looked like. It wasn't forgetting. It wasn't approval. It was letting go not for them, but for yourself. Choosing peace over poison. Softness over resentment. Presence over pain. One verse came back to her often, one she'd first learned as a child but only now began to understand. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. Luke 15:20. Most people read that parable and see the Son, but Margaret saw the Father, the one who waited not with judgment, but with hope, the one who opened his arms before a word was spoken, the one who had every right to demand an apology, but instead gave welcome. And in her own quiet way, that's what Margaret had chosen. She had stopped asking to be seen and, instead, made space for others to grow into seeing. The house looked smaller now, not in size, but in weight. It no longer felt like it held her hostage. It felt like hers again. The garden had started blooming again. Little by little, the kind of stubborn beauty that shows up even when no one's watching. She liked that. One Thursday morning, as she swept the porch, Greg pulled into the driveway. He didn't bring flowers. He brought a thermos and 2 folding chairs. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, holding up the extra chair. "Not at all," Margaret said, brushing off a leaf. They sat without words for a while. Then Greg cleared his throat. "I didn't know if you'd ever come back." Margaret sipped her tea. "I didn't either. But here I am." "You're different." "I am." He nodded slowly. It's a good different. She smiled. He looked down at his hands. I wasn't a great son. You were a tired one, she said gently, and a confused one. But I think you were always trying in your own way. He looked up. You're not mad? No, she said. I just don't have space in my heart for resentment anymore. It takes up too much room I'd rather give to peace. They sat a little longer, watching the shadows change on the lawn. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just real. And sometimes, Margaret thought, that's the most radical thing two people can offer each other. Quiet, honest presence. That evening, she pulled out her notebook one last time. On the final page, she wrote, Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means remembering who you are and choosing not to let pain define you. It's about making space for others to change, and for yourself to heal. Not everyone will meet you halfway, but that's not your burden to carry. Grace, when it's real, doesn't need an audience. It just needs a willing heart. And with that, she closed the notebook, turned off the light, and walked into the rest of her life, not seeking approval, but standing firm in the quiet power of becoming whole again. If this story spoke to something in you, a quiet strength, a pain you've lived through, a grace you've had to grow into, let us know in the comments. Forgiveness doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives like spring, gently, in stillness, after a long winter. Subscribe for more stories like this, stories that honor wisdom, healing, and the sacred beauty of second chances.